Number 3. The Nacozari Santa Muerte Cult. Nacozari is a small mining town in northern Mexico, about 75 miles away from the Arizona border. It is a peaceful town, and it has avoided a lot of the cartel violence. 44-year-old Sylvia Miraz and her family lived in a shack on the outskirts of town. The police thought that something unusual was going on with the family. Men from out of town were seen coming and going from the shack. They thought it was possible that the shack was being used for prostitution, but they could never prove anything. Miraz was known in the town as the leader of a small Santa Muerte cult. Santa Muerte translates to Holy Death, and she is the embodiment of death. She is usually depicted as a skeletal woman with long robes. She has millions of followers, and she's a popular deity among drug dealers and murderers. People give her sacrifices, often cigarettes, alcohol, or loose change, in exchange for rewards and protection. In July 2010, one of Nacozari's young residents, 10-year-old Martin Rios, was reported missing. For 8 months, Martin's parents searched for him, but they had no idea where he went. Then in March 2011, another boy in the town was reported missing, 10-year-old Jesus Octavio Martinez Janez. The police realized that both boys knew some people in common. That was Miraz and her boyfriend, Eduardo Sanchez. Martin was Miraz's step-grandson, and Sanchez had dated Jesus' mother. Both boys were known to spend time at Miraz's shack, so the police went to the shack to search for any traces of the boys. Buried in the dirt floor of one of Miraz's daughter's bedrooms was the body of Martin. Miraz, Sanchez, and 6 other family members, including a 15-year-old girl, were all arrested. Some of the family members admitted to killing Martin. They also led the police to the body of Jesus, who was buried near the shack. But that wasn't all. There was a third body buried nearby. It was 55-year-old Cleotilde Romero, who went missing in December 2009. She was a friend of Miraz. Miraz attacked her with an axe. The 2 boys were killed in ceremonies as a ritual sacrifice to Santa Muerte. Miraz's son, Ramon, slit the boys' throats and wrists, and then their blood was drained into containers. Miraz would then pour the blood around the altar to Santa Muerte. Miraz said that the sacrifices were to bring her family riches and protection. She is currently serving a life sentence. Number 2. The Anthill Kids. Roche Thériault was born in 1947 in Saginaw, Quebec. In the 1970s, Thériault got involved with the Seventh-day Adventist movement. Seventh-day Adventism is a Protestant Christian denomination, and 2 major tenets set it apart from other Protestant Christian denominations. The first is that they believe Saturday is the last day of the week, making Saturday their Sabbath. The second is that they believe that the second coming of Christ could happen at any time. Thériault was charismatic, and by 1977, he had amassed a following of mostly young women. His followers lived with their parents, but on the weekends they would crash at his girlfriend's house. In 1977, Thériault opened an alternative medicine store in Ste. Marie, Quebec. The store was successful, and Thériault gained more followers. In 1978, the Seventh-day Adventists voted Thériault out of the church. Undeterred, Thériault moved his dozen or so followers onto a hill near St. Jacques, Quebec. They lived in some tents, and over the next several months, they built a one-room cabin. Thériault had married his followers to each other, but after the cabin was built, he declared that all the marriages he presided over were void. He then started to have sex with almost all the women in the cult. Thériault also started acting like a sadist. He would make his followers self-mutilate or mutilate each other. For example, he made a husband cut off his wife's small toe with an axe. In November 1980, he gained a new follower, a man with a history of mental illness named Guy Vere. Theriault decided that he should be the babysitter for the kids that he didn't father. On the night of November 23, 1980, Vere walked into the nearby town and he told the locals that a baby had died at the cabin. The police went to the cabin and searched the area around it. They found the body of a baby boy. He was the son of 2 cult members, one of the few cult children that wasn't Theriault's, making him one of the children that Vere was supposed to take care of. The police interviewed the cult members, and they all told the same story. They said that Vere snapped because the baby wouldn't stop crying, so he got violent with him. A 1993 book about the cult called Savage Messiah had a different version of the death. The authors wrote that Theriault wanted to circumcise the boy, and to anesthetize him, he gave him alcohol. The alcohol poisoned the baby, and he died. After the boy died, Theriault wanted to punish Vere, and amazingly, he convinced him that he should be castrated. He even got Vere to sign a contract agreeing to it. Then Theriault performed the procedure himself. After the body was found, Theriault, Vere, the boy's parents, and 2 other cult members were charged with criminal negligence. Vere was eventually recommitted to a psychiatric hospital. The other followers received several months in prison or probation. Theriault was sentenced to 2 years less a day, and he was sent to Quebec City to serve his sentence. The cult's cabin was torn down, and the cult members moved into apartments near the jail. When Theriault got out of prison, he gathered up his cult and drove them out to Burnt River, Ontario. At this point, the cult consisted of Theriault, 2 men, 9 women, and 10 children. 4 of the women were pregnant. In Burnt River, his followers built a new cabin. Theriault started calling his cult the Anthill Kids because he thought that they worked together like ants. Theriault promised that there would be no more violence, but it wasn't long before he started abusing his followers again. This included abusing children, both his own and the children of other cult members. Things got so bad that in January 1985, one woman decided to leave her baby outside in a blizzard instead of letting Theriault continue to abuse him. The death was reported several months later, and it led to the rest of the children being taken away by the Children's Aid Society. After the children were taken away, the situation at the cabin got much worse. It usually got really bad when Theriault drank, and he drank often. At times, he would hurt his followers or force them to injure themselves or each other. These wounds would sometimes result in infections. Theriault had dropped out in the 7th grade, but he had always been fascinated by anatomy. So he convinced his followers to allow him to operate on them. In the fall of 1988, one of the cult members, a woman named Solange Ballard, became sick. One day, Theriault got drunk and decided he was going to operate on her. Sadly, the 32-year-old did not survive. The abuses continued, and amazingly, Theriault only lost 1 follower. On July 26, 1989, Theriault was drunk yet again. This time he turned his attention to Gabrielle Lavallée. He pinned her hand to a table with a hunting knife. When he saw that the arm turned blue, he amputated it with a butcher knife. The next day, Lavallée left for a women's shelter, but amazingly she came back to the cult after a few days. Upon her return, Theriault continued to torture her under the pretense of healing her. Nearly 3 weeks after losing her arm, she ran away from the cabin and made it to the hospital. The police were called, and after some questioning, Lavallée told them what happened to her arm. When the police went to the cabin, they found that Theriault and the cult had fled. Theriault was arrested 6 weeks later. A few weeks after that, he admitted that Ballard was dead. Theriault was given 10 years for cutting Lavallee's arm off and a life sentence for the murder of Ballard. In prison, some of his female cult members continued to visit him, and he continued to father children. On February 26, 2011, Theriault's cellmate, 60-year-old Matthew Gerard MacDonald, stabbed Theriot to death. MacDonald said that he didn't like Theriot because of the crimes he committed against women and children. Roch Theriot was 63 when he died, and during his lifetime, he fathered 26 children. Number 1. The Church of the Lamb of God. In 1890, under pressure from the United States government, the Mormon Church renounced the practice of polygamy. Not everyone agreed with this, and some Mormons chose to start their own sects. One of those people was Alma de LeBaron. In 1924, he moved his 2 wives and his 8 children to northern Mexico. They started a farm called Laconia LeBaron. Not long after arriving in Mexico, one of Alma's wives gave birth to a boy, Ervil. Over the years, Alma started to amass more followers. When Alma died in 1951, there were about 20 families, which was about 200 followers. After Alma's death, the leadership of the church went to his 7th son, Joel. The second in command and Joel's right-hand man was his younger brother, Ervil. Ervil was a known womanizer who went after married women and underage girls. In 1963, Joel founded a settlement called Los Molinos in the Baja California Peninsula. It was 8,500 acres, and it had 9 miles of beach line. The families that moved there built huts and started a farm. Joel wanted the area to be a self-sustaining commune for polygamous Mormons. Ervil, on the other hand, wanted to make the area a tourist attraction. Ervil would fly in potential investors to tour the area. The families that lived there worked hard to sustain themselves. Meanwhile, Ervil drove a Gold Impala and wore custom-made suits. He claimed he did that only to impress the investors. In the late 1960s, Ervil decided he wanted to revive the Mormon practice of blood atonement. Mormon leader Brigham Young first preached about blood atonement in September 1856. A blood atonement is a punishment for someone who commits a horrible sin. To save their soul and ensure their entrance into heaven, the sinner could be killed by righteous Mormons. Ervil also created what he called civil laws, which were based on the 10 Commandments. If someone broke a civil law, Ervil said that he was allowed to have them killed. Over the years, Joel and Ervil argued about the direction of the church. Then in 1970, Ervil said that God told him that they should run the church together. This proved to be the breaking point for Joel, and Ervil was removed from his position of leadership. Enraged, Ervil chose to leave the church. Not long afterwards, he established his own cult, the Church of the Lamb of God, in San Diego. This caused a split among Joel's church, with some families leaving with Ervil, while others stayed with Joel. In August 1972, hitmen on the orders of Ervil beat and shot Joel twice in the head. Ervil thought that this would convince Joel's followers to join his cult. It didn't, though. Instead, they chose Ervil's brother Verlin to be their new leader. Verlin knew that he was going to be his brother's next target, so he kept a low profile and moved around a lot. Verlin was right to worry because Ervil was plotting to kill him. But first, Ervil had to deal with the Mexican authorities for Joel's murder. In December 1972, he turned himself in to the Mexican police. 9 months later, he went to trial, he was convicted, and he was given 12 years in prison. However, he ended up only serving 1 day of his sentence. His conviction was overturned on a technicality, and he was released. After getting out of prison in 1974, Ervil rejoined his cult, and they moved to Utah. Ervil appointed a young man named Dean Vest as his military general. Vest was 6'8", 280 pounds, and he served in Vietnam. On the day after Christmas in 1974, Vest led an assault on Los Molinos. Molotov cocktails were thrown in the huts, and guns were fired indiscriminately. Vest and his men went to Verlin's house, where one of his wives and 6 of his children were sleeping, but Verlin wasn't there. The family was able to get out of the hut before Vest and 4 other men opened fire on it. 2 people were killed during the raid, and 17 others were injured. Within 30 months of the raid, 10 more murders were attributed to the Church of the Lamb of God. 2 of them were committed by Ervil's 10th wife, Vonda White. She first killed another cult member's wife in January 1975. Then Ervil got Vonda to kill Dean Vest. Ervil thought that Vest was going to leave the cult because his wife had already left it. Since Vest was a large man that was trained in combat, he was going to be hard to kill. However, he probably wouldn't expect Vonda to be the assassin. She was 5'3", and in June 1976, she was 6 months pregnant. On June 16th, Vest learned that his wife was in a car accident, and he was going to fly out to Seattle to be with her. Before he left, he stopped by Vonda's house. Vonda was at home making lunch for her 6 children. She realized that if she was going to kill Vest, she had to do it before he left the house. Vonda sent her children upstairs, and then as Vest stood at the kitchen sink washing his hands, she shot him to death. After the murder, the cult moved to Denver, Colorado, where they opened an appliance repair shop. The cult lived in poverty at first, but within a year they opened up repair shops in other cities. But problems were brewing inside the cult. Notably, Ervil's 17-year-old daughter Rebecca wasn't happy. She had been forced to marry a rich cult member, and she had recently given birth. Her husband was indifferent to her, and she was forced to work in Dallas, but leave her baby with some family in Denver. Rebecca wanted things to change, or she was going to the police. In April 1977, Ervil got 2 of his followers, Dwayne Sheenoth and Eddie Marsden, to strangle her with a rope and dispose of her body. Her body has never been found. Supposedly, Ervil got mad that the killers got blood in the trunk of his car. Around this time, Ervil hatched a plan to finally kill his younger brother Verlin. Verlin was constantly moving around, and Ervil was having a problem tracking him down. Ervil thought that the best chance to kill him would be to lure him to an event, like a funeral. Ervil also just happened to have someone he needed to be killed. That was Roland Allred, a prominent polygamous Mormon. Ervil wanted Allred dead because he refused to pay extortion money. In May 1977, 17-year-old Rena Sheenoth, who was Ervil's 13th wife, and another young woman went to Allred's homeopathic clinic, which was just outside of Salt Lake City. Rena fired 7 shots into Allred's chest, killing him. 2,600 people, including Verlin, attended his funeral. That was too many witnesses, and the hit on Verlin was called off. By the beginning of 1979, several cult members had grown disgusted by the violence. They escaped the cult and went to the police. Ervil ended up being arrested for the murder of Allred in June 1979. He was convicted in the spring of 1980, and he was sentenced to life in prison. While in prison in Utah, Ervil wrote a 500-page manuscript called the Book of the New Covenant. The manuscript contained a hit list of about 50 people. They were people who testified against Ervil, police officers, and officials at the prison. Ervil gave the manuscript to several cult members. On August 16, 1981, Ervil, who had fathered 54 children, died in his prison cell from heart failure. In a strange twist of fate, Verlin died in a car accident just hours later. Sadly, Ervil's death did not bring about peace. Instead, it started off another string of murders and deaths. It started with the death of Ervil's 20-year-old son, Isaac, in June 1983. Isaac had testified against his father at his murder trial. He supposedly died by suicide in a cult member's home. His suicide is considered highly suspicious. Months later, in the fall, Ervil's fifth wife, Lorna, was strangled to death and then buried in a shallow grave. The mother of eight's body has never been found. In December 1983, 33-year-old Arturo LeBaron, who is Ervil's eldest son and the new leader of the cult, was murdered by a cult member named Leo Ivanek. After his murder, 20-year-old Herbert LeBaron, another son of Ervil's, became the cult leader. He wanted revenge on Ivanek and anyone who sided with him. In 1984, he killed one of Ivanek's accomplices and Ervil's 12th wife. Neither of their bodies have ever been found. On May 21, 1987, Leo Ivanek went missing. The only trace of him that could be found were his dentures in a puddle of blood. Then on June 27, 1988, something happened that made headlines across the country. On that day, Eddie Marston was killed when he went to pick up an appliance at a home in Irving, Texas. 250 miles away in Houston, Mark Sheenoth was gunned down in the back office of the appliance store where he worked. Mark's brother, Dwayne Sheenoth, went to pick up a used dryer at a home in a different Houston suburb, and he was also gunned down. Sadly, Dwayne's 8-year-old daughter Jennifer was with him, and she was killed as well. All three men were former cult members, and they were all killed around the same time, 4 p.m. The day of the murders was the 144th anniversary of the death of Joseph Smith, who was the founder of Mormonism. Within days, 5 cult members, including 4 of Ervil's children, were arrested, and 1 escaped to Mexico. In exchange for immunity, 1 daughter testified against the other cult members. They all received prison time for their roles in the murders. The 4 o'clock murders terrified people in the Mormon community, and ex-cult members went into hiding. But after the 4 o'clock murders, the cult went quiet. In May 2010, the cult member who escaped after the 4 o'clock murders, Jacqueline LeBaron, was arrested in Honduras. She was extradited to the United States, and she was sentenced to 3 years in prison. In February 2017, Anna LeBaron, Ervil's daughter who escaped from the cult when she was 13 years old, did an interview with the BBC. She said that she is sure that the cult will not go on killing people. She said that if she thought there was a chance of it, she wouldn't have done the interview because she would never endanger her family. It is believed that Ervil LeBaron and the Church of the Lamb of God are responsible for 25 to 30 murders. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please subscribe. We post a new video every Thursday and Sunday. You can also like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. The links are in the description below the video. But that's all for now. Thanks again for watching.